There has never been more data to evaluate pitchers than there is now. So, how do you sort through it all? What's important and what are the stats I use when evaluating the Orioles pitchers? We'll get to that coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Tuesday, April 15th, 2025, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we're going to do part 2 of kind of my stats explainer series that I'm going to be doing this season. Part 1 was last week when I dove into the advanced hitting stats that I like to use to evaluate Orioles hitters and hitters around the game, talked about why they're important, why they're different from traditional stats, and how I use them and why I use them on a day-to-day basis. But when you really think about it, there's only so much you can do with hitters. With pitchers, there is so much more data that is out there. You can go pitch by pitch, delivery by delivery, everything across the board. And I like to talk about it on this show as well. So I figured, as I did with the hitting episode, I don't want to leave a lot of you in the dark. If you enjoy this show, wherever you listen, wherever you watch on YouTube, I do talk advanced stats from time to time. And I think it's good to kind of pause and do a bit of an explainer. I did this with roster moves last year, did it with hitting stats last week. Let's do it with pitching stats. The stats I use, why they're important, and how they are used to evaluate a pitcher in Major League Baseball. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $250 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So I got some good positive feedback from my show on hitters last week and the stats that I used there. If you haven't checked that one out, please go back and do that, because that's kind of a precursor to this episode with some of the things that I do talk about. And wherever you do listen, make sure to subscribe, leave a 5-star rating and review. And of course, we're here on YouTube. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. So let's dive into pitching numbers. There is hitting data across the board. Talked about it last week. That's nothing compared to the amount of pitching data that is out there. So let's start with kind of the general pitcher stats that I use when evaluating pitchers, whether they're doing well or, like the Orioles rotation so far this year, is performing a little bit poorly. So let's start with some things that I talked about last week on the hitter episode. That is hard hit rate and barrel rate. Those are really important for hitters. How hard are you hitting the ball? A hard hit ball is a ball measured 95 miles per hour or more in terms of its exit velocity off a hitter's bat. Last year, hard hit balls had a 490 batting average in Major League Baseball, and they have basically seen that 95 miles per hour is the level of exit velocity where the growth becomes exponential for how much success you're having as a hitter. So on the pitching side, it is important to avoid giving up hard hit balls, because basically half the time they turn into a hit, and 40% hard hit is about the league average for a hitter. So for a pitcher, if you're holding opponents under a 40% hard hit rate, well, that's pretty good to do. You also want to avoid barrels. Barreling the ball is when you hit it hard, but also at a certain launch angle, balls that generally leads to extra base hits and home runs across the board. About an 8% barrel rate is league average. If a pitcher is allowing below that, those are good things as well. That generally means you're not allowing a lot of hard contact with hard hit percentage, and you're not allowing the ball to leave the ballpark generally and allowing hitters to do damage. But for more explanations on those stats, that is in last week's hitter episode. I think the big number that I mention a lot for pitchers that I wanted to dive into here is fielding independent pitching. I will refer to it as FIP. You will see it as capital FIP if you're looking at Fangraphs or other websites. And generally it'll be called FIP from here on out. FIP is a number that is in kind of a similar counting as ERA. And it's a number that I like to reference a lot on this show. It's measured in a similar way where you could see a pitcher have a 3.18 FIP. You could see a pitcher have a 3.18 ERA. Is measured in a similar vein. They are just different stats. This is from Fangraphs, quote, FIP measures what a player's ERA would look like if the pitcher were to have experienced league average results on balls in play. What does that mean? Well, basically, research shows that pitchers cannot fully control their balls in play. They have some control over where the ball is hit, how hard or how soft it is hit, whether it's ground balls or fly balls or line drives, but they don't have full control of it. A lot of it is in the batter's hands as well. And when you think about it, a ball that could be hit at the exact same exit velocity, on the exact same velocity from the pitcher's pitch, the exact same launch angle, and the exact same distance with the exact same bat, but in two different ballparks and against two different defenses behind it, depending on the positioning of the defenders, the overall defensive skill of the player it's hit towards, one could be a hit and the other one could be an out, with everything the same, just changing defensive players and defensive positioning. And really, a pitcher on the mound can't really control where the defenders are positioned most of the time or how good the defenders are behind him. So FIP is a stat that allows us to not penalize a pitcher for, to put it bluntly, your defense being kind of bad at times, or not to give a pitcher too many flowers if he's pitching in front of just an incredible defense, and knowing, okay, how good would this pitcher be if everything was just kind of average? The batted ball luck, the defense behind him, if it was just kind of 50% across the board. Sequencing can also change in ERA, right? Say there's two pitchers, they're pitching in two games at the same time. One pitcher starts an inning with two strikeouts and then gives up a single, and a home run, and then gets another strikeout to end the inning. The other pitcher gets two strikeouts, then gives up a homer, then a single, then gets another strikeout to end the inning. Both pitchers got three strikeouts, allowed a homer, and allowed two singles. The first pitcher gave up 3 runs. The second pitcher gave up 1 run. They are going to have vastly different ERAs coming out of that inning, but essentially they allowed the same stuff. It was just the sequencing was different. And some of that you can say, well, a pitcher should be bearing down when there's runners on base and not give up a homer. And, one's pitching out of the stretch more often than the other one is pitching out of the windup. I get that. But I feel like all of the penalization there for just sequencing shouldn't go on the pitcher, and that is what ERA does. There's really not much of a difference between those two outings, but ERA says the difference is huge. FIP takes that into account as well. And also, as a pitcher, especially a starting pitcher, how good the relievers who come in after you can also define your ERA. If you leave with runners on first and third and 2 outs in the 6th inning, and the reliever comes in and gets a strikeout, well, you don't get any earned runs. If another reliever comes in and gives up a 3-run homer, you get 2 more earned runs charged to your count. In both cases, you didn't do anything else. These are not to say ERA is terrible, but it's not the best way to evaluate how a pitcher has done throughout a season. This is where FIP comes in. It is a better evaluation tool. What does a pitcher control? Pitchers generally control walks, they control strikeouts, they control hit by pitches, and mostly they control home runs. All the balls that are not hit, quote unquote, in play. That is where FIP comes into the equation. Basically, the number removes luck, removes all the luck that the research has shown is involved with balls getting hit in play and what happens after they leave the bat of a hitter and they go into play, and it's up to the defense behind a pitcher. It allows you to better evaluate a pitcher's true talent. So it takes those 4 things, the strikeouts, the walks, the hit by pitches, and the homers, and then it takes those at face value, what the pitcher allows, and then assumes the rest of it is average batted ball luck. What's happening when the ball puts in play behind the pitcher is league average, and that is what number it spits out for a pitcher's FIP. Really, it shows what a pitcher's ERA should be if they were getting a normal amount of luck on balls in play. So let me give you some Orioles examples. These are from 2024. Gregory Soto, in his 2 months with the Orioles, had a 5.09 ERA. But as we know, he had 3 terrible outings, and then he was awesome for the rest of the year. But those first 3 outings were so terrible, he had a 5+ ERA. But despite a 5.09 ERA, he had a 3.79 FIP, which looks a whole lot better. Some of that is because we knew what his true talent was later in the year. Some of that is because he's an extreme hard-throwing sinker ball, ground ball pitcher. And usually when you're giving up that many ground balls, we expect not as many ground balls to sneak through the infield for hits as they did against Soto. So it kind of helps you predict he'll have a better season in 2025 with better luck. And yes, he had a bad outing on Sunday. Those are the first runs he allowed this year. Soto had been incredible out of the Orioles bullpen up until Sunday. FIP kind of helped to predict that hey, he's going to be better than his numbers show. Here's another one that can kind of show both sides of the coin. Zach Eflin, after being traded to the Orioles last year, had a 2.60 ERA down the stretch with the O's. That was incredible. He was an amazing addition after the trade deadline. But it did come with a 3.94 FIP for more of his true talent. Now, why is that the case for Eflin? Well, he has so many balls that he allows in play. He doesn't get a lot of strikeouts. He doesn't walk anybody, and he doesn't really allow a lot of home runs. So a lot of his balls are in play. When a guy produces a low ERA and there's a ton of balls in play, generally he's getting some good luck on his side, because the averages say if you're letting that many balls into play, at some point it's going to swing in the other direction. They're going to hit it hard. They're going to hit over guys' heads. And that just didn't happen in a small sample of 9 starts for Eflin. But what FIP tells you for last year is, hey, Zach Eflin was really good in these 9 starts. Had he made 9 more starts last season, his ERA probably would have climbed up a bit closer to above 3, just because he would have gotten some worse luck on all of those balls that get put in play. Here's another example from the Orioles. Jorge Lopez, before he was traded from the Orioles to the Twins, the 2022 deadline, had a 1.68 ERA. He was the all-star closer for kind of an emerging Orioles team. He was getting out after out, but his FIP was a little bit higher. That was still great, right? He still had a 2.99 FIP, and you can evaluate FIP like projected or expected ERA. So a 2.99 FIP and expected ERA, essentially, that is still a great number. But the Orioles can see when your FIP is well over a run higher than your ERA, especially as a reliever who's pitching 1 or so innings at a time and has a much smaller sample size, that can help you project a reliever where regression is coming. Like, this guy is getting lucky. He's going to get worse. So the Orioles traded him, and as we know, they got a lot back for him. Cade Povich and Yennier Cano coming back from Minnesota in that trade, plus 2 other pitching prospects who are still in the Orioles system. And it did. Lopez went to Minnesota, and he was not very good out of the Twins bullpen in the second half of the season. Now, the Orioles were using some other data to see that, but FIP was the big thing that shows that. And it is not a perfect statistic, but what it does do is it allows you to better project what a guy should be doing, and kind of explains pitchers where you look at their stuff and they're getting a lot of swings and misses and it's nasty and you feel like they should be better and their ERA is just high, especially early in seasons. And you're just trying to figure out, like, what is going on with this guy? Well, FIP can tell you a lot of things that ERA cannot. And that is where I think it is helpful. Because, again, you're maybe not controlling all home runs. That is where XFIP comes in. It averages out the home run rate as well. But, for example, let's look at some of the FIPs of the 2025 Orioles right now. For example, let's go to Gregory Soto, another great example. 4.05 ERA after his blow-up outing on Sunday. But he's got a 1.65 FIP because he hasn't really been walking guys. He's been striking out a ton of guys. He's not allowing home runs at all. He just got some bad luck on his batted balls really on Sunday, and that spiked his ERA, but it's not he's not been a 4 ERA pitcher this year. He's been amazing and then had 1 bad outing. FIP does a better job of being like, hey, ERA, let's calm down a little bit. You're jumping up way too much on these relievers. This is how good this guy has really, really been, which can be a good indicator. On the flip side, Seranthony Dominguez has a 0 ERA in 7 innings. He has not allowed an earned run this year. But he has a 3.29 FIP because Dominguez has walked his fair share of batters so far this year, and he's controlling the walks. And while he is getting strikeouts, 6 walks in 7 innings. He's thrown 2 wild pitches. At some point, you're going to get yourself into trouble. Now, he's only allowed 1 hit in 7 innings. That's why he has a 0 ERA. But FIP tells you he's not going to keep getting away with all these walks. At some point, it's going to move in the other direction. And that is where some of this stuff can absolutely be helpful. How about Charlie Morton? He's got an 8.78 ERA. Now, his 5.40 FIP is not good, but it shows you that, hey, Morton's striking out a lot of guys. He is getting some bad batted ball luck. It should be lower. And while his expected FIP is 3.98, that says he's been getting bad home run luck. Like, it's telling you Charlie Morton is going to turn this thing around a little bit. That is where some of these stats can really, really help you out as you kind of dive into a pitcher's numbers. Then the other counting stats I talk about, strikeout and walk rate, pretty self-explanatory. League average is about 22% for a strikeout rate, about 8% for a walk rate. Anything above or below for a pitcher shows you, a guy that's avoiding walks or walking too many guys, or a guy that's big on Ks or is not really getting strikeouts. And if a pitcher has a strikeout rate that isn't very high and he's still performing well, he has a good FIP, a good ERA, then you're maybe looking at ground ball rate. If you're not getting strikeouts, you got to get grounders, because as we know, ground balls, the worst thing that can happen on a grounder is generally going to be a double down the line. Most grounders that are hits end up being singles. It's just really hard for a grounder hit up the middle to turn into anything but a single. And at worst, they might turn into hustle doubles, but they're not going to be triples, and they're certainly not going to be home runs. Genyer Cano is a great example of this. In his all-star season in 2023, Cano had a 23% strikeout rate, basically league average. Like, it's solid. He had a low walk rate. He was putting up good numbers, but you're seeing an all-star reliever is striking out guys at just a league average rate. Most of your all-star relievers are striking out guys at like double the league average rate. So how was Cano so good? Well, an elite ground ball rate at 58%, one of the better ones in the league in 2023. League average is about 41% on a ground ball rate. That tells you how a guy can be good. And with a high ground ball rate, it allows you to get away with potentially a high hard hit rate, because you don't want your hard hit rate to be high. But if all your hard hit balls are hit on the ground, as I mentioned, the worst that's going to happen usually is going to be a single. And a lot of times they're going to be hit right at guys, gives you a better chance to turn double plays when ground balls are hit harder. So even though Cano does give up hard contact, it's generally on the ground. And that is how he has a lot of success despite not having a super high strikeout rate. But that is the general stuff for pitchers across the board that I look at. Let's get a little more granular coming up next, because the other thing with pitchers is that was kind of the equal to evaluating hitters, how they do overall. But pitchers all throw multiple different pitches, and it's easier to evaluate each one pitch by pitch. How do I do that? We'll talk about that coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are almost here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. Now, FanDuel is great because they make it so easy on the app, whether you're picking your favorite team or diving into player props. From three-pointers to steals to assists, FanDuel has so many ways to bet your favorite player props. Plus, after the game tips off, you can even combine live prop bets into a same-game parlay for a chance to win big. So don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com to claim your $250 in bonus bets today. So I talked about the general advanced pitching stats that I use. Let's dive in a little bit deeper. Let's talk about pitch to pitch, because when you hear me talk about maybe a new pitcher the Orioles have signed or acquired, or a new pitcher they've brought up from AAA or whatever it may be, I talk a lot about their singular pitches and how they work off each other and how effective each one of them is. So let's start with four-seam fastballs. That is the main pitch in Major League Baseball. Even though they've gone down and down over the years, you're still going to generally see a pitcher throwing a fastball, and generally is going to be a four-seam fastball. That is usually a straighter pitch, not a cutter, not a sinker, not a two-seam fastball, but a four-seamer is that kind of straight and narrow fastball that you've seen guys throwing for hundreds of years at this point. Now, for velocity, league average continues to go up. In 2024, a league average four-seam fastball was about 94 miles an hour. Again, 94 miles an hour is league average. That is where we have gotten to in terms of velocity in Major League Baseball. So you are generally looking for guys who are throwing harder than that. But shape of your four-seam fastball is also important, because while it's easier to see on a sinker, right? You see the sinking motion. On a cutter, you see the cutting motion going the other way. On a four-seam fastball, that's kind of the quote-unquote straight ball, and it's not a pitch that you really see moving that much. That's why people put so much emphasis on the velocity. It's about, because it doesn't quote-unquote move, it's how hard can you throw that pitch, giving the hitter less and less time to react to it and hit it, the harder you throw it. But movement on a four-seam fastball, while it's hard to see with the naked eye, is just as important as the velocity on that pitch. The other thing I talk about with fourth-seam fastballs is induced vertical break, or IVB. That is what gives a four-seam fastball the quote-unquote rising effect that has made it so hard for certain hitters to just even get a bat on. Induced vertical break, basically the way to explain it for a four-seam fastball, is that When a guy is throwing any type of overhand, this is not the case for sidearm or submariners, but any guy is throwing you even 3/4 or straight up overhand, because of physics and gravity, the ball is going to come out of your hand and is going to start moving downwards as it heads towards home plate. It is a tall pitcher throwing to a catcher who's squatting down, who's lower than the pitcher's arm angle 9 times out of 10. That means the ball's got to go down to get to where that catcher wants it. Even if you're trying to throw a high pitch, the arm angle of a pitcher is still going to be higher than the head of most hitters. You're throwing the ball on a downward trajectory, and you're throwing from up on a mound, so you're automatically going to be throwing the ball even further on a downward trajectory. If a four-seam fastball has good induced vertical break, or IVB, it basically drops less. So when a hitter sees a four-seam fastball, they're expecting the ball to drop because it's coming from that downward plane. The angle is going downward. If a pitcher has good IVB on a four-seam fastball, it doesn't drop as much. So while a hitter might see a fastball and saying, oh, I see that release point, that ball is going to drop to right around my belly button, I'm going to swing through that thing and I'm going to crush it. If you have good induced vertical break, your ball doesn't drop as much. It has the amount of spin to kind of defy gravity a little bit and stay on a flatter plane for longer. So while the hitter thinks it's going to be at their belly button, it's more, maybe not at their chin, but it comes up a little further towards their chest and they swing and miss under it, or they hit the bottom of the ball, they just pop it up. That's usually as good as a strikeout as well. And there are certain pitchers who do not have super high velocities on their four-seam fastballs, but their four-seam fastballs are awesome swing and miss pitches, awesome pitches for getting pop-outs because of that induced vertical break, the IVB. About 16 inches of induced vertical break on a four-seam fastball, considered pretty good. Anything 18 inches or above is like super, super elite. And anything above 16, you've got that thing working. You ever wondered how Keegan Aiken basically throws 93 miles an hour, basically an average fastball for a lefty, but how his fastball performs so well? Well, he has huge IVB on that pitch. Last year, he had 18.3 inches of induced vertical break. That elite number is 18, and Aiken has it. That's how he's able to get guys out, especially when you throw it up in the zone. That effect becomes harder and harder for a hitter. Same thing for Cade Povich and Dean Kramer. Both guys throw at, or even in Povich's case, under the average fastball velocity, but both have really good induced vertical break, 17 inches or more on their four-seam fastball. So when they throw those pitches high in the zone, they don't come down like a hitter expects. Hitters swing under them, hitters pop them up. That's how those guys can have success on a four-seam fastball. So if you're watching a pitcher face the Orioles and he's throwing 92, but it seems like the O's are swinging and missing at everything, check out the induced vertical break on Baseball Savant. It might tell more of a story about why that pitcher is performing so well. We also talk about sweepers a lot. A sweeper is kind of a new kind of slider that has more straight across break. So most sliders are kind of going at an angled break. They're not going straight down. They're not going straight across. They're going somewhere in the middle, going from right to left for a right-hander. A sweeper is the extreme right to left pitch. It is sweeping right across the zone. If you think about a clock, a sweeper is mostly that, what do we call it, 2 o'clock to 8 o'clock break. It's not exactly the 3 o'clock to 9 o'clock straight across, but it's pretty close going right to left for a right-hander. It's usually a slower pitch than a regular slider. It moves more, and it moves more horizontally. So it has been important to call it something different. I know people get mad for some reason. They call a sweeper instead of just a slider, but it moves very differently than your general slider. It has a different velocity. It's very helpful to have a different name and have it categorized differently. The horizontal break on a sweeper, about 14 inches is average. Corbin Burns, remember last year, he didn't really throw his sweeper much. And then when he was struggling in August, he went back to his sweeper in September and kind of turned his season back around. His sweeper has 17 inches of horizontal break, 3 inches above average. That's one of the reasons why it is so effective for a guy like Burns. Now, I talk about a lot of other pitches as well. There's not as defining characteristics for these other pitches, but they are important. And when I do talk about them, I talk about whiff rate or swing and miss rate, basically the same thing. Anything above 50% whiff rate on a pitch is crazy elite. Anything above 40% swing and miss rate, that is 40% of the time hitters swing at this certain pitch from a pitcher, they swing and miss. That is a huge number, 40%. Even anything above 30% is good. To put it in perspective, Felix Bautista's splitter in 2023, before the injury, had a 60.2% swing and miss rate or whiff rate. That was the best number on any pitch in Major League Baseball in 2023 among qualified pitchers. Last year for the Orioles, Yennier Cano's slider at 50%, Gregory Soto's slider 49%, the Burns slider 46%, Dominguez sweeper 45%, Dean Kramer's splitter 36%. Like, these are some of the best whiff pitches that the Orioles had. Now, slider whiff percentages are going to be higher than everything else because they just move more and they get swung and missed at more, but it's different for different pitches. Like 40 plus, 45 plus is elite for a slider. 35 plus percent is elite for any kind of fastball to get swings and misses. And when I also look at pitches, I'll look at the batting average and the slugging percentage against them. That's pretty self-explanatory. How are hitters performing in general with countable stats against this pitch? Now, you'll also hear me talk about whiffs when I break down specific starts in game recaps for pitchers, because you want to look at, okay, how well is this pitch performing game to game? Well, a lot can be learned from how many times guys are swinging and missing at it. And that is why I'm always referencing how many whiffs a pitcher is getting on a certain pitch or in general in each of his starts. The other things that are important here, spin rate is measured in RPMs. That's revolutions per minute. A higher spin rate on a pitch generally means there'll be more late break. So kind of that fall off the table action you hear from a curveball where it's spinning in towards the plate, and then at the last second, it just drops. Higher spin rates with spin efficiency generally means you're going to get that late break. On a slider, like 2,700 RPMs is super elite. Corbin Burns was at almost 3,000 last year. He was third in baseball at 2,982. Curveball elite spin is more like 2,900 and above. Charlie Morton was at almost 3,100 RPMs on his curveball last year, ninth in MLB. That's why he's still good. It's a stat that doesn't matter as much on changeups. You don't want those to spin as much, but it can tell you the story. And then there is one more thing that I talk about with general pitch metrics, and I'm going to talk about that coming up next. That is Stuff Plus. You hear me reference that a lot. What really is that stat, and how important is it when evaluating a pitcher? We'll get to that to finish off the show. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Prize Picks. Basketball and hockey playoffs are heating up, and there is no better way to turn your sports knowledge into real rewards than with Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy. With Prize Picks, you simply pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and you're in. You can even combine players across sports, baseball, basketball, hockey, and more for your chance to win up to 2,000 times your cash. Now, I'm looking at this week and maybe looking at the basketball board and thinking about maybe the play-in games, maybe the playoffs starting, like Luka Doncic, right? Whatever the more number is, 28 points for now, I think I might be taking the more number on Luka. And that's generally, especially since he's been fired up since the trade, probably a good pick to make. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's at Prize Picks. Run your game. So to finish things up here, we're talking about how to evaluate pitchers, how to specifically evaluate certain pitches that guys throw. And I wanted to talk about Stuff Plus, because this is something I talk about a lot on this podcast, but I haven't done the full deep dive into what it means. So Stuff Plus was a statistic created by Eno Saris and Max Bay, 2 guys that know a lot about pitching. I highly recommend Eno's podcast at The Athletic, Rates and Barrels, with Derek Van Riper, and they have Jed Lowry and Trevor May and others on that show. It's a fantastic baseball podcast. It's kind of centered around fantasy baseball, but it's more baseball in general, and Eno is a super smart pitching mind as well. Basically, Stuff Plus shows you how good a specific pitch is, and in general, how good a pitcher is, just based on stuff. You hear about stuff. This guy has nasty stuff. That is the velocity, the movement, the spin, and the release point of a pitch. Doesn't have anything to do with results. You know, how hard does it get hit? What average does it give up? What strikeout percentage does it have? It doesn't have anything to do with command. How close is the guy throwing this pitch to the strike zone? Can he hit the corners with it? Whatever it may be. And it doesn't at this point talk about how well it plays off of your other pitches. It is purely how nasty is this single pitch. Now, the stat's a little confusing because 100 is not league average. For example, a 4-seam fastball 99 is average, but for a slider 110 is average. But when you talk about a full pitcher's Stuff Plus of all of his arsenal, about 100 is league average. That is where 100 comes in. So, for example, let's talk about the Orioles leaders in Stuff Plus in 2025. This is through play on Saturday, I believe. 4-seam fastball, Dean Kramer at 111 has the best Stuff Plus. It's because Splendid has solid velocity. It's got that really good induced vertical break, that riding sensation that I talked about, gives you good Stuff Plus. Best sinker, Matt Bowman at 123 Stuff Plus on the sinker. Guess what? He comes from that weird righty sidearm arm angle. It has crazy run and movement. And even though he only throws it 91, 92 miles an hour, because it moves so much, it comes from such a funky angle, it's got great stuff. Cutter is CNL Perez at a 111 Stuff Plus on his brand new cutter, debuting it this year. We know how bad Perez has been. Maybe the cutter, throwing that more, is the key to getting back to the good reliever he's been in the past. The best slider on the team, Seranthony Dominguez with a 129 slider Stuff Plus. It is a great sweeper. It moves a lot. He gets a lot of his strikeouts with it. And even though he walks guys, he gets out of trouble generally using that sweeper. Best curveball Stuff Plus, pretty self-explanatory, is Charlie Morton with a 113 Stuff Plus. I just mentioned almost 3,100 RPMs of spin rate on his curveball. That was 9th best in Major League Baseball last year. Yeah, he's having his issues this season, but that curveball is still just tremendous, even at 41 years old. One of the big reasons why the Orioles went and got him. Now, changeups and splitters, and Eno Saris will admit this, they are still not perfect in terms of being measured by Stuff Plus. Some of it is because they don't really rely on spin rate like a lot of other pitches do, and they don't rely as much on velocity. They look a little bit different. But the best changeup Stuff Plus on this team is the best pitch overall on this team. Brian Baker's new changeup that he found this offseason at a 142 Stuff Plus. And listen, it's been pretty good. And then the best splitter, is Felix Bautista. Now, however, Felix's splitter is at 109 Stuff Plus this year. It was 138 before the surgery in 2023. Now, his splitter hasn't really been great. That's why he struggled in some outings. But again, the jury is still kind of out on how good Stuff Plus is for splitters and changeup. So you might ask, okay, why is this important? Well, it really helps you evaluate pitchers when new guys come in or when a young pitcher comes up, and it stabilizes pretty fast. You only have to throw like 5 or 10 pitches of this certain pitch to get a true Stuff Plus rating. You could have, after one single outing, a guy's Stuff Plus on everything that he throws, and that makes an easy thing to go to quickly evaluate just how nasty this guy can be. And it also can help explain why guys have their roster spots. For example, Brian Baker in 2023 and 2024, when he was in the big leagues, it wasn't very good. And quite honestly, he was struggling some in AAA. And while he wasn't in the bigs that long, people were wondering, like, why is this guy still filling up a 40-man roster spot? Why did this guy get a bullpen spot on the opening day roster out of spring training? Well, he always had good Stuff Plus numbers, 108 and 104 and 107 the last 3 years. The Orioles saw the stuff was still in there. He finally fixed his changeup. He's got a 117 overall Stuff Plus this year, second best among all Orioles pitchers. That allows you to hold on to guys. It can also tell a story about CNL Perez, whose cutter is helping him still sit at a 106 Stuff Plus, well above average, despite the fact that he's been one of the worst relievers in Major League Baseball. That is why the Orioles have not quite given up on him yet here this April, because they know the stuff is still in there. He's just got to find the command. And it's a stat that doesn't really show you command, but it can show you just truly how nasty a pitch is. And when we're talking about, hey, how can this new guy be good? How can this guy that just got called up be good? You can first look at that Stuff Plus rating that only takes into account, again, velocity, movement, spin rate, and the release point and the arm angle, and how that all factors into how just nasty this pitch can be. Obviously, throwing it in the zone and locating it is another huge part of this, but there are some stats for that. We can use some stats like Location Plus and Pitching Plus at Fangraphs. There's an Arsenal Plus stat at Baseball Prospectus, which kind of is trying to show how your entire arsenal, all your 3 or 4 or 5 pitches work off of each other and help each other out. That is a good thing to look at. And really the next frontier is, okay, how else do I find stuff? Because I'm still learning, and great if you listen to the show, watch this show to learn about this stuff. I'm still learning myself. Eno Saris, Rates and Barrels is great. Pitcherlist.com is great when they're not writing quote unquote news journalism articles and just evaluating pitchers. They're good over there. Fangraphs, fantastic resource. Baseball Savant, fantastic resource. Every episode that I record, I usually have a tab, at least one, of Fangraphs and Baseball Savant up in front of me when I'm recording. It is a huge resource for me. Lance Brozdowski has an amazing YouTube channel where he breaks down pitching. You can learn a lot from that channel. And all of this is kind of the reason why right now in Major League Baseball, pitchers are so ahead of hitters, because you just can get, and on the public side and on the back end private side, there's probably even more of this. Just so much more data is out there on pitchers and specific pitches, and so many more things you can tinker with as a pitcher to get better than as a hitter. And guys use TrackMan and Edgertronic devices. This is technology that helps you slow motion video and get the metrics on every single pitch you throw. Now, it's also probably leading to a little more injury. Guys are throwing every pitch in front of these machines in the offseason, trying to hit maximum velo, maximum spin, maximum movement. Studies have shown that the harder you're throwing and the more you're going max effort on your pitches, the more likely you are to injure yourself, especially your elbow. And that is leading, I think, to a lot of the elbow injuries we're seeing in baseball. So it's not all good stuff, right? Tracking this and having this be so public and being able to know all of these numbers could be hurting baseball in a way, because guys see it more. They're striving for more of these numbers as much as they're striving for their results. And it probably is leading to more injury. And we know this as Orioles fans the last 2 years, all the pitching injuries. It's not been a great thing for baseball. So I do come out on both sides of it. I love all the data we have and the way we can break it down, but it's concerning how many guys are getting injured because of they're chasing some of this stuff. It's not because the data exists. It's because they're chasing it and they know teams will sign you if you can maximize out on this data. And that, I think, is the core issue here. So after talking about all this, I'm going to give you all a little bit of homework, because the Orioles on Monday claimed right-handed pitcher Scott Blewett off waivers from the Minnesota Twins. He will most likely be activated on the Orioles roster either Tuesday or Wednesday, and I will break him down on Wednesday's episode. But before I do that, I want you to go onto the Fangraphs page for Scott Blewett, go onto the Baseball Savant page for Scott Blewett, and find something among these numbers I talked about that intrigues you about Blewett and throw it in the Locked On Orioles comments section here on YouTube. I want to let you all give a chance to kind of do what I do on the back end, find what could be intriguing, what could be fixed, what could be better when the Orioles claim a relief pitcher like Scott Blewett off waivers, and what they see in him to bring him in and hopefully help their bullpen. But I will talk about him on tomorrow's episode and also recap Game 1 between the Orioles and the Guardians. Cleveland is coming to town tonight to start a 3-game series with the O's. It'll be Logan Allen, the lefty, going against Charlie Morton, trying to get it back together for the Orioles. A 7:05 start. Guardians are 8-7 on the season at this point. Orioles sitting at a not so nice 6-9. Again, I'll be back tomorrow. We're talking Scott Blewett and we're talking Orioles Guardians Game 1. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.